The great library of Centauri Prime stretched for miles beneath the planet's surface. Its crystal walls held the collected knowledge of 1,000 worlds and 10,000 years of galactic history. In the deepest section, where few beings ever ventured, sat rows upon rows of data crystals containing myths, legends, and stories that most civilizations had forgotten. Archivist Kellen moved through these forgotten halls with practiced ease. Her 6 arms worked quickly, sorting through ancient files that had not been touched in centuries. The Althari were known throughout the galaxy as careful record keepers, and Kellen took pride in maintaining even the most obscure pieces of information. She paused at a crystal marked with symbols she barely recognized. The data inside was old, very old. According to the timestamp, it had been filed over 3,000 years ago by a long-dead exploration team. The file was labeled simply, Sol System Extinct Species Report. Kellen touched the crystal with one delicate finger. A holographic display appeared in the air before her, showing rough star charts and basic biological data. The report was short and poorly written, as if the original explorers had been in a hurry to leave. Species designation, human, she read aloud to the empty archive. Planet of origin, 3rd planet from star designated Sol. Status, extinct. Cause of extinction, self-inflicted warfare. Notable characteristics, highly aggressive. Extremely adaptable. Unusually creative problem-solving abilities. Capable of surviving in environments lethal to most known species. The report continued with details that made Kellen's fur stand on end. These humans apparently fought wars that lasted for decades. They lived on a planet where the weather could kill them, the animals hunted them, and even the plants were sometimes poisonous. Yet somehow they had become the dominant species on their world. The most disturbing part was a note at the end. Recommend complete avoidance of Sol System. If humans somehow survived their wars, they would pose significant threat to galactic stability. Their combination of intelligence, aggression, and adaptability is unprecedented in known species. Kellen saved the file and moved on. It was just another story from a dead world. The galaxy was full of such tales. 3 sectors away, Admiral Zektar of the Hegemony Fleet stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Dominator. Through the massive viewport, he could see the conquered world of Rigel 7 burning in the distance. Another easy victory for the Hegemony war machine. The Hegemony had broken away from the weak Galactic Federation 50 years ago. While the Federation talked about peace and cooperation, the Hegemony believed in strength. They had better weapons, stronger ships, and most importantly, the will to use them. In 5 decades, they had conquered 67 star systems and enslaved dozens of species. Admiral, called Science Officer Vex from his station, we have completed analysis of the Federation archive data we captured from Rigel 7. Zektar did not turn from the viewport. Anything useful? Mostly historical records and cultural databases. However, there is one interesting file. A species report about something called humans from a system called Sol. Never heard of them, Zektar said. Are they a threat? Vex's tentacles writhed in what passed for laughter among his people. Hardly, Admiral. According to this report, they destroyed themselves in primitive wars over 3,000 years ago. The amusing part is that the original explorers seemed terrified of them. Listen to this description. Humans appear capable of fighting even when severely wounded. Observed instances of humans continuing to function with injuries that would incapacitate most species. Recommend extreme caution if contact is ever made. Several bridge officers made sounds of amusement. The idea of primitive beings frightening advanced explorers was ridiculous. Weapons technology? Zektar asked. Chemical explosives and projectile weapons. They had barely achieved faster-than-light travel when they wiped themselves out. The report mentioned something called nuclear weapons that they used to destroy their own cities. Zektar finally turned from the viewport, his scaled face showing mild interest. They destroyed their own cities? Apparently, Admiral. The explorers found evidence of massive craters where population centers used to be. These humans actually used weapons of mass destruction against their own species. The Admiral considered this. Such ruthlessness was impressive in a primitive way. Most species had enough sense to avoid destroying their own homeworld. But a race that would do such things to themselves would certainly do worse to their enemies. Fascinating, he said, but irrelevant. Dead species cannot threaten the hegemony. Focus on identifying Federation military assets in the next system. The bridge crew returned to their duties, and the file about humans was forgotten. After all, what could an extinct primitive species possibly matter to the greatest military force in the galaxy? On the other side of Federation space, Captain Sarah Chen stood in the observation deck of the UES Defiance, watching stars wheel past as her ship traveled through hyperspace. The Defiance was one of humanity's newest ships, built in the orbital yards above Mars using technology that would have seemed like magic to her ancestors. Sarah was tall and lean, with short dark hair and eyes that had seen too much for someone who looked barely 30. Like all humans who lived in space, she had genetic modifications that allowed her to function in low gravity and radiation, but the modifications were subtle. She still looked completely human. The ship around her was a marvel of engineering, 5 kilometers long and packed with the most advanced technology humanity could build. Its fusion drives could push it to significant fractions of light speed. Its armor was made from materials stronger than diamond. Its weapons could crack open asteroids. To any outside observer, the Defiance looked like a warship. But Sarah and her crew called it an exploration vessel. To humans, there was no real difference between the two. "Captain," came a voice from behind her. Sarah turned to see Commander Jackson, her second in command. "We're getting some interesting readings from the long-range sensors." "What kind of readings?" Sarah asked as they walked toward the bridge. "Radio signals. Organized, artificial. Definitely not natural phenomena." Sarah felt her heart rate increase slightly. For 300 years, humanity had been alone in the galaxy. They had spread to dozens of star systems, built cities on hundreds of worlds, and explored thousands of empty planets. But they had never found any sign of other intelligent life. The bridge of the Defiance was a study in controlled chaos. Dozens of crew members worked at stations monitoring everything from stellar navigation to weapons systems. At the center of it all sat the captain's chair, surrounded by holographic displays showing the ship's status and surrounding space. "Show me," Sarah said as she settled into her chair. The main screen filled with wave patterns and frequency analysis. The signals were clearly artificial, but unlike anything in human databases, the mathematical structure was wrong, as if they had been created by minds that thought in completely different patterns. "How long to reach the source?" Sarah asked. 18 hours at current speed, Captain," replied the navigation officer. Sarah stared at the screen for a long moment. Humanity's first contact with alien intelligence. Every human alive had dreamed of this moment. But Sarah had read enough history to know that first contact situations were dangerous. Species meeting for the first time had many reasons to fight and few reasons to trust. "Alert the fleet," she said finally, "and send a message back to Earth. Tell them we may not be alone anymore." The message would take weeks to reach Earth, traveling through a chain of communication relays across human space. But when it arrived, it would change everything. Humanity was about to learn that the galaxy was full of life, most of it older and more advanced than themselves. They were also about to learn that some of that life had very specific ideas about what to do with younger, weaker species. In the depths of the Centauri archives, Archivist Kellen finished her daily rounds and prepared to return to her quarters. As she walked through the ancient halls, she passed thousands of data crystals containing the histories of countless worlds. Most held stories of species that had risen, flourished, and eventually fallen to war, disaster, or simple entropy. She paused again at the crystal containing the human file. Something about it bothered her, though she could not say what. The description of humans as dangerous seemed almost quaint compared to the real threats the galaxy faced. The hegemony had weapons that could destroy planets. They had conquered species with technology far more advanced than anything described in the human file. Yet the original explorers had been frightened enough to recommend avoiding the entire Sol system. That level of caution seemed excessive for a species that fought with chemical explosives and metal projectiles. Kellen made a mental note to research the Sol system further when she had time. Ancient mysteries were her specialty, and this one was more intriguing than most. She could not know that in a few short months the mystery would solve itself. The species that the galaxy had dismissed as legend would announce their presence in a way that no one could ignore. And once they did, every military force in known space would understand why those long-dead explorers had been so afraid. The legends were about to become real, and the galaxy was not prepared for what that would mean. Far from the archives and the military meetings on the edge of known space, Something stirred in the darkness between stars. Long-range sensors, if anyone had been watching, would have detected energy signatures unlike anything in galactic databases. Drive systems that burned with fusion fire, cutting through space at speeds that defied expectation. The humans were coming, and they were not coming alone. The Federation colony of New Thessia had been established for over 2 centuries. It was a peaceful world, home to 3 million beings from a dozen different species. The colonists had built their cities in harmony with the planet's natural beauty, creating gardens that stretched between crystalline towers and artificial lakes. Ambassador Lyran stood in the communication center of New Thessia's capital city, staring at the message that had arrived 6 hours ago. She had read it dozens of times, but it still seemed impossible. The message was crude, transmitted on ancient radio frequencies that most modern ships did not even monitor. It consisted of mathematical sequences, basic chemical formulas, and simple pictures drawn in ones and zeros. The meaning was clear to anyone who studied it, a request for peaceful contact from an unknown species. But what made the message remarkable was not its content, but its origin. The signals had come from ships using drive systems that the Federation had abandoned centuries ago. Fusion rockets, of all things. It was like receiving a message from the distant past. "Ambassador," said her aide, a young Althari named Seren. "The Federation Council is requesting an immediate report. They want to know if you believe this is genuine." Lyran ran one slender hand through her silver hair. At 300 years old, she was young for an Althari, but ancient by most species standards. She had handled first contact situations before, but never anything like this. "It's genuine," she said finally. "The mathematical proofs are too complex to be fake, and the engineering signatures are consistent throughout all the transmissions. Someone is out there and they want to talk. Should we respond?" Lyran considered this carefully. Federation protocol required extensive analysis before responding to unknown species. There were committees that needed to meet, experts who needed to consult, and safety procedures that needed to be followed. The process usually took months, but something about these messages felt different. There was an urgency to them, a sense that whoever had sent them was taking a great risk just by making contact. And there was something else, something that made her fur stand on end when she thought about it too much. The mathematical sequences in the messages were not just correct. They were elegant. Whoever had composed them understood advanced physics and mathematics, but they had chosen to communicate using the simplest possible methods. It was like watching a master artist draw with crayons. "Prepare a response," she said. "Basic mathematical sequences and scientific data, nothing that could be considered threatening or too advanced, and begin preparations for a formal first contact meeting." Seren's eyes widened. "Without approval from the council?" "I'll take responsibility," Lyran said. "If I'm wrong, they can remove me from my position. But if I'm right and we delay, we might lose the chance to make peaceful contact with a new species." The response was transmitted 8 hours later. Within 4 hours, they received a reply that made Lyran's decision look prophetic. The unknown ships were requesting permission to enter New Thessia's star system for a formal meeting. They promised to approach slowly with weapons powered down, following whatever protocols the Federation deemed appropriate. More importantly, they had somehow learned enough of the Federation's trade language from their brief exchange to compose their message in broken but understandable galactic standard. The speed of their linguistic analysis was remarkable. 2 days later, Lyran stood on the observation deck of New Thessia's orbital station, waiting for humanity's first formal introduction to galactic civilization. Long-range sensors had detected the approaching ships hours ago, but they were still too distant to see clearly. "Contact in 30 minutes, reported the station's sensor operator. 5 ships moving in formation. Drive signatures consistent with fusion propulsion, but much more advanced than our initial estimates." Lyran nodded, trying to calm her nerves. She had handled dozens of diplomatic situations, but this one felt different. There was something about these newcomers that made her instincts warn of danger, even though they had shown nothing but peaceful intentions. "Visual contact," the operator announced. The main screen filled with an image that made everyone in the observation deck fall silent. The ships approaching New Thessia were unlike anything in Federation databases. They were angular, brutal-looking vessels that seemed designed for war rather than exploration. Their hulls were dark and scarred, as if they had seen considerable combat. The largest ship was enormous, easily 5 kilometers long and bristling with what looked like weapon emplacements. Its design was both primitive and sophisticated, like someone had taken ancient concepts and refined them to perfection. "Are those weapons?" asked Saran quietly. "Unknown," replied the sensor operator. "The energy signatures are unlike anything in our databases. But if they are weapons, they're powered down as promised." Laren studied the ships carefully. Despite their warlike appearance, they moved with precise discipline. Their formation was perfect. Their approach vectors calculated to minimize any possible threat to the station. Whoever commanded these vessels was clearly skilled in military tactics. "They're requesting permission to dock," the communications officer reported. "The lead ship is asking to send a small delegation aboard our station." "Granted," Lyron said, "but maintain full security protocols. I want security teams standing by, but keep them out of sight. We don't want to appear hostile, but we need to be prepared for anything." The largest human ship moved slowly toward the station's main docking bay. As it approached, Lyran could see more details of its construction. The hull was covered in sensor arrays and communication equipment, but also in what were unmistakably defensive systems. This was a ship built by a species that expected trouble. An hour later, Lyran stood in the station's main conference room, waiting for her first glimpse of humanity. The docking had proceeded smoothly, with the human ship systems interfacing perfectly with Federation technology despite their apparent differences. The door opened, and 3 figures entered the room. The first thing Lyran noticed was how similar they looked to several species she knew. 2 legs, 2 arms, 1 head. But there were subtle differences that marked them as something entirely new. They moved with a predatory grace that reminded her of the great hunters from her homeworld. Their eyes constantly scanned the room, noting exits, potential threats, and defensive positions. The leader was a tall female with short dark hair and intelligent brown eyes. She wore a simple uniform in dark blue with minimal decoration but obvious quality. When she spoke, her voice was calm and controlled, but there was an undertone of strength that suggested she was accustomed to being obeyed. "Ambassador Lyran," she said in careful galactic standard. "I am Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth System ship Defiance. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us." "Captain Chen?" Lyran replied, using the formal greeting gesture of her people. "Welcome to New Thessia. I must say we were quite surprised to receive your transmissions." Sarah smiled, and Lyran was struck by how the expression transformed her face. The predatory alertness remained, but it was overlaid with genuine warmth. "We were equally surprised to discover we were not alone in the galaxy," Sarah said. "We have been exploring space for several centuries without finding any sign of other intelligent life. Learning that there is an entire galactic civilization has been somewhat overwhelming." Lyran gestured for her guests to sit at the conference table. As they did, she noticed how they positioned themselves to have clear views of all entrances while maintaining easy access to their equipment. These were people who had learned to be cautious through hard experience. "If you don't mind me asking," Lyran said, "your ships appear to be designed for combat. Is your species currently at war?" Sarah exchanged glances with her companions before answering. "Not currently, no. But humanity has learned that it is better to be prepared for conflict than to be caught unprepared. Our ships are designed to serve multiple purposes." It was a diplomatic non-answer, but Lyran sensed there was more to the story. The scars on the human ships, the military bearing of their crew, the weapons that were obviously present despite being powered down, all of it suggested a species with considerable experience in warfare. "Perhaps you could tell us about your civilization," Lyran said. "We know very little about your people or your history." Sarah was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. "Humanity originated on a planet called Earth in the Sol system. We achieved spaceflight approximately 400 years ago and began establishing colonies on other worlds about 3 centuries ago. We currently have settlements in 47 star systems, with a total population of approximately 8 billion. The numbers were impressive, but not extraordinary by galactic standards. What caught Lyran's attention was what Sarah had not said. No mention of wars, conflicts, or the reasons why their ships were so heavily armed. "And your technology?" Lyran asked. "Your ships use fusion drives, which most galactic civilizations abandoned long ago in favor of more efficient systems." "We prefer technologies that are reliable and maintainable," Sarah replied. "Fusion drives may be primitive by your standards, but they work consistently across a wide range of conditions. We have found that sophisticated systems can be vulnerable when you need them most. Again, there was an undertone of hard-won experience in her words. Liren was beginning to understand that humanity's technological choices were not based on ignorance, but on bitter lessons learned through conflict. The meeting continued for several hours, with both sides sharing basic information about their civilizations. The humans were clearly intelligent and sophisticated, despite their preference for what seemed like primitive technology. They had developed advanced mathematics, physics, and engineering. Their understanding of biology and medicine was particularly impressive. But throughout the conversation, Liren could not shake the feeling that she was only seeing the surface of humanity. There were depths to these people that they were not revealing, experiences that had shaped them in ways she did not yet understand. It was near the end of the meeting when Captain Chen mentioned something that made Liren's blood run cold. "We have detected considerable military activity in this region of space," Sarah said casually. "Ships with advanced weaponry moving in organized formations. Is there currently a conflict in this area?" "The hegemony," Liren said, and saw the humans' expressions sharpen with interest. "They are a militant faction that broke away from the Federation 50 years ago. They have been conquering systems and enslaving populations throughout this region." "Enslaving?" Sarah's voice was very quiet, but there was something dangerous in it. "Yes. They capture populations from conquered worlds and use them for forced labor. The Federation has been unable to stop them due to their superior military technology." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. The humans' casual friendliness vanished, replaced by something cold and predatory. Liren realized that she had just revealed something that humanity found deeply offensive. "How many systems have they conquered?" asked one of Sarah's companions, a man with scars on his hands and the bearing of a veteran soldier. 67 confirmed, Liren replied. "Possibly more. They tend to attack outer rim colonies where Federation response is limited." Sarah was very still, the kind of stillness that preceded violence. When she spoke, her voice was calm, but Liren could sense the fury beneath the surface. "Thank you for the information, Ambassador. We will need to consider this as we plan our integration with galactic civilization." The meeting ended shortly after, with promises of future communication and cooperation. But as Liren watched the humans return to their ship, she could not escape the feeling that she had just made a terrible mistake. The legends in the ancient archives had described humans as dangerous when threatened. She was beginning to suspect that threatening the innocent might be an even greater error. As the human ships departed New Thessia, their fusion drives burning bright against the stars, Liren filed her report with the Federation Council. She described the humans as a peaceful but militaristic species, with advanced technology and significant population. She recommended full diplomatic relations and suggested that humanity could be a valuable ally, but in her private log she wrote something very different. "Today I met the species from the ancient legends. They call themselves humans, and they are everything the old stories claimed. They are intelligent, adaptive, and undoubtedly dangerous. But what frightens me most is not what they might do to us, but what they might do to our enemies. I fear we have just introduced the galaxy to something it is not prepared for." She was right to be afraid. The humans had learned about the hegemony, and they were not pleased. Admiral Zektar stood in his private quarters aboard the Dominator, studying intelligence reports from across hegemony space. The conquest of the Rigel system had proceeded ahead of schedule, and his forces were already preparing for the next phase of expansion. Everything was going according to plan. A soft chime indicated an incoming message. Zektar activated his personal communications array and saw the face of Intelligence Director Cross, one of the few beings in the hegemony hierarchy that he genuinely respected. "Admiral," Cross said without preamble, "we have received interesting intelligence from our spies in Federation space. It appears they have made contact with a previously unknown species." "Another primitive culture begging for Federation protection?" Zektar asked, not looking up from his reports. "Perhaps not so primitive. The species calls itself human and claims to control 47 star systems. More importantly, their ships use fusion drives and kinetic weapons." This got Zektar's attention. "Fusion drives? How wonderfully primitive. What is their military strength?" "Unknown, but estimated to be limited. Their technology appears to be several centuries behind current galactic standards. However, there is something unusual about them." Zektar finally looked up. "Unusual how?" Our spies report that their ships, while technologically primitive, are heavily armed and extremely well built. Their crews also display military discipline that suggests significant combat experience. Combat with whom? If they have been isolated, what could they have been fighting? Unknown, Admiral. But intelligence believes they may have been fighting each other. There are references in their communications to something called the War that apparently devastated their homeworld several centuries ago. Zektar considered this. A species that had survived a devastating war might have useful military experience, but they would also be weakened by their losses. And if they were using primitive technology, they would be no match for hegemony weapons. Where are they located? Their nearest colony is a system called New Geneva, approximately 40 light-years from our forward positions. Long-range reconnaissance suggests a population of about 2 million, defended by perhaps a dozen ships. Perfect, Zektar said. We need test subjects for the new quantum disruptor weapons anyway. Order the 3rd Battle Group to New Geneva. Full conquest protocols. I want to see how these humans fight before we decide whether they are worth enslaving or simply eliminating. Yes, Admiral. Should we inform them that this is a test engagement? No. Let them face us at full strength. If they cannot handle a simple battle group, they are not worth our time. 3 days later, Commodore Vash commanded 3 of the hegemony's most advanced dreadnoughts as they dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the New Geneva system. The ships were marvels of military engineering, each one capable of destroying planets if necessary. Their quantum shields could deflect any known weapon, and their reality-warping guns could tear holes in space itself. Contact, reported the sensor operator. 12 ships in orbit around the 3rd planet. Fusion drives as expected. Energy signatures suggest basic weapons systems. Vash studied the tactical display with satisfaction. The human ships were pathetically small compared to his dreadnoughts. The largest was barely a kilometer long, while his flagship stretched for 5 kilometers. It would be over quickly. Open a channel, he ordered. The main screen filled with the image of a human female in a simple blue uniform. She looked young by most species standards, but her eyes held the kind of steady confidence that came from experience. This is Colonel Martinez, commanding New Geneva Defense Force, she said in accented but clear galactic standard. You have entered human space without permission. State your intentions, Vash was amused. The primitive was trying to sound threatening despite being outnumbered and outgunned by an enormous margin. I am Commodore Vash of the Hegemony 3rd Battle Group, he replied. Your system is now under hegemony control. Surrender immediately and you will be processed for slavery. Resist and you will be destroyed. The human's expression did not change. I see, and if we choose a 3rd option? There is no 3rd option. There is always a 3rd option, Commodore. The channel closed. Vash stared at the blank screen for a moment, then laughed. The arrogance of primitives never ceased to amaze him. Battle stations, he ordered. Quantum shields to maximum. Reality disruptors charged and ready. Let's see how long these humans last. Colonel Elena Martinez stood in the command center of the defense station orbiting New Geneva, surrounded by displays showing the approaching enemy ships. The hegemony vessels were massive and clearly advanced far beyond anything humanity currently possessed. By all reasonable standards, this should be a hopeless battle. But Elena had not survived the siege of Proxima and the Battle of Wolf 359 by accepting reasonable standards. All ships. This is actual, she said into her communications array. Enemy vessels are significantly more advanced than our intelligence estimated. Standard tactics will not be effective. Switch to Omega protocols immediately. Throughout the small human fleet, crews that had been preparing for a conventional space battle suddenly shifted to very different procedures. Weapon systems that had been disguised as sensor arrays came online. Cargo bays opened to reveal missile pods that should not have existed. Ships that looked like armed merchants revealed themselves as dedicated warships. Most importantly, every human ship began broadcasting the same message on a frequency that the hegemony could not intercept. It was a simple message, but one that would change the nature of the battle. Pack protocol is in effect. I say again, pack protocol is in effect. On the bridge of his flagship, Commodore Vash watched in mild interest as the human ships began to spread out. It was a reasonable tactical formation, though it would do them little good against quantum-shielded dreadnoughts. Fire when ready, he ordered. The reality disruptors charged and fired, sending bolts of twisted space-time toward the human fleet. The weapons were designed to tear apart anything they hit at the molecular level. No known defense could stop them. The lead human ship, a vessel called the UES Determination, took a direct hit. For a moment, Vash thought he had scored an easy kill. Then he noticed that the ship was still there, still functional, still fighting. "Report," he snapped. "Direct hit confirmed," replied his weapons officer. "But the target appears to be undamaged." "How is that possible?" Before Vash could respond, the human ships opened fire. What emerged from their weapons was not energy beams or exotic particles, but simple kinetic projectiles. Chunks of metal accelerated to significant fractions of light speed. The projectiles struck Vash's quantum shields and bounced off harmlessly as expected. But then something unexpected happened. The human ships fired again, and this time their projectiles were different. They seemed to be made of multiple components that separated just before impact. The outer shell of each projectile struck the quantum shields and was deflected, but the inner core continued through, as if the shield was not there at all. "Shields are failing," reported the defensive systems operator. "Unknown projectile type is penetrating quantum barriers." Vash stared at the display in disbelief. The humans were using some kind of multi-stage kinetic weapon that bypassed his most advanced defenses. How was that possible? The answer was simple, though Vash would never understand it. Humanity had spent 3 centuries fighting wars where the enemy had every possible advantage. They had learned to win by being smarter, more creative, and more stubborn than anyone expected. The human multi-stage projectiles worked by using the quantum shield's own properties against them. The outer shell carried a quantum signature that the shields recognized as friendly. By the time the shield realized its mistake, the inner core was already through. It was not advanced technology. It was applied cunning, the kind that came from having to fight superior opponents with inferior equipment. As the hegemony shields began to fail, the humans pressed their advantage, but they did not fight the way most species fought. Instead of concentrating fire on single targets, they seemed to be everywhere at once, coordinating their attacks with precision that should have been impossible for such a small force. The reason became clear when Commodore Vash realized what the human ships were doing. They were not just fighting as individual units. They were fighting as a single organism, sharing targeting data and coordinating attacks in real time. When one ship was damaged, the others immediately moved to protect it. When a hegemony ship's weakness was discovered, every human weapon focused on exploiting it. Most disturbing of all, the humans seemed to learn and adapt during the battle itself. Weapons that had been effective at the beginning of the fight became useless as the humans developed countermeasures. Tactical maneuvers that should have caught them off guard were anticipated and countered. "Sir," called the communications officer, "we're receiving multiple distress signals from surrounding systems. Human ships are attacking our bases throughout this sector." Vash felt his blood turn cold. "That's impossible. Intelligence reported only 12 ships in this system." "Confirmed, sir. At least 40 human vessels have been detected attacking hegemony positions across 6 star systems simultaneously." The humans had not just been defending New Geneva. They had been preparing a coordinated strike against every hegemony position within range. While Vash had been planning to test their defenses, they had been planning to destroy his entire sector command. The battle around New Geneva continued for 3 more hours. By the end, 2 of Vash's 3 dreadnoughts were destroyed and his flagship was severely damaged. The human fleet had taken casualties as well, but they had won a victory that should have been impossible. As the surviving hegemony ship limped away from New Geneva, Vash found himself studying the tactical recordings with something approaching fear. The humans had not just defeated his force. They had done it using technology that was centuries behind his own. They had won through superior tactics, better coordination, and a willingness to take risks that bordered on insanity. But what truly frightened him was the realization that this had not been humanity's full strength. The ships at New Geneva had been a colony defense force, not a main battle fleet. If this was what human civilians could do when threatened, what were their actual military forces capable of? On New Geneva, Colonel Martinez stood in her damaged command center, receiving reports from across human space. The coordinated strikes had been more successful than anyone had dared hope. 12 hegemony bases had been destroyed or severely damaged, and their forces in this entire sector had been thrown into chaos. But she knew this was only the beginning. The hegemony would not ignore such a humiliation. They would return in greater force with better understanding of human capabilities. That was fine. Humanity had been preparing for this kind of war for 3 centuries. Elena opened a communication channel to Earth and began composing her report. It was short and to the point. First contact with hostile alien force complete. Enemy capabilities exceed previous estimates but remain manageable. Recommend full military mobilization. The pack is under attack. Time to show them why the legends exist. Across human space, the message was received and understood. Humanity had tried peace, diplomacy, and cooperation. Now they would try the alternative. The galaxy was about to learn what humans were really like when they stopped pretending to be civilized. In the depths of space, Admiral Zektar received Commodore Vash's report with growing disbelief and rage. A force that should have been invincible had been defeated by primitives using kinetic weapons and clever tactics. It was impossible, humiliating, and absolutely unacceptable. Mobilize the first and second fleets, he ordered. I want every available ship prepared for immediate deployment. These humans will learn the price of defying the hegemony. But as his staff began preparations for a massive military response, Zektar could not shake the feeling that he was making a terrible mistake. The tactical recordings from New Geneva showed human ships performing maneuvers that should have been impossible, displaying coordination that suggested a hive mind, and fighting with a ferocity that bordered on fanaticism. Most disturbing of all was the way the humans had fought even when their ships were critically damaged. Other species retreated when faced with overwhelming odds. Humans seemed to fight harder. For the first time in his long military career, Admiral Zektar wondered if the hegemony might have chosen the wrong enemy. He was about to find out exactly how wrong they had been. Captain Sarah Chen stood before the emergency assembly of the Federation Council on Centauri Prime, her dress uniform bearing the insignia of the United Earth Systems. Around her sat representatives from dozens of species, all of them watching her with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. The news of humanity's conflict with the hegemony had spread quickly through diplomatic channels. What had begun as first contact between 2 civilizations had escalated into open warfare in less than a month. The Federation leadership was desperate to understand what they were dealing with. Captain Chen, said Council Speaker Varrock, an ancient being whose species had been part of the Federation for over a millennium. We have received disturbing reports about the conflict between your people and the hegemony. Can you explain what happened at New Geneva? Sarah's expression was calm, but there was something cold in her eyes that made several council members shift uncomfortably in their seats. The hegemony attacked one of our colonies without provocation, she said simply. They demanded our surrender and threatened to enslave our population. We declined their offer. According to hegemony communications, they lost 2 dreadnoughts in that engagement. Varrock continued. Their ships are among the most advanced in known space. How did a small colonial defense force achieve such a victory? Sarah was quiet for a moment, as if considering how much to reveal. The hegemony ships were advanced, but they relied too heavily on their technology. Their crews were not prepared for unconventional tactics. And the simultaneous attacks on hegemony bases throughout the sector? Asked Ambassador Lirin, who had been unusually quiet during the proceedings. Standard military doctrine, Sarah replied. When attacked, you eliminate the enemy's ability to launch follow-up strikes. We identified 12 hegemony installations within range and neutralized them. The casual way she described the destruction of military bases that had taken the hegemony decades to build sent a chill through the council chamber. This human spoke of warfare the way most species discussed routine maintenance. Captain, said Councillor Teth of the peaceful Etherian Republic, the Federation has been trying to negotiate with the hegemony for 50 years. Military action has only escalated their aggression. Do you not fear that your attacks will provoke even greater retaliation? Sarah's smile was not reassuring. Counselor, we have been studying your records of the hegemony conflict. In 50 years of diplomacy, how many systems have they conquered? 67 confirmed, Teth admitted reluctantly. And how many populations have they enslaved? Approximately 2 billion sentients. In 1 month of warfare, how many systems have they conquered from humanity? Teth hesitated. None. And how many humans have they enslaved? None, Sarah nodded. Then it would appear that our approach is more effective than diplomacy. The blunt statement caused an uproar among the council members. Several species began speaking at once, their translators creating a cacophony of different languages. Speaker Varrock called for order. but it took several minutes to restore calm. "Captain Chen," Varrock said finally, "surely you understand that military escalation puts the entire galaxy at risk. The hegemony has weapons capable of destroying planets. If they choose to use them against human colonies, they will find that we are prepared for that possibility," Sarah interrupted. "We have been preparing for total war since before we left our homeworld. The hegemony may have superior technology, but they have never fought an enemy that refuses to surrender." Ambassador Liren leaned forward in her seat. "What exactly are you saying, Captain?" Sarah turned to face the Althari diplomat directly.
"I am saying that humanity gives you two choices, Ambassador.
Stand with us against the hegemony or stay out of our way. But understand this. We will not negotiate with slavers, we will not retreat from bullies, and we will not allow the hegemony to continue their expansion unopposed." "And if the Federation chooses not to support your war," asked Counselor Teth, "then the Federation will be irrelevant to the outcome," Sarah replied. "With or without your help, the hegemony will learn that some species cannot be conquered." The meeting continued for several more hours, but the essential message was clear. Humanity had no intention of backing down from the conflict, regardless of the consequences. They would fight the hegemony with or without Federation support. As the council session ended, Ambassador Liren approached Sarah in the corridor outside the chamber. "Captain," she said quietly, "I need to ask you something directly. What are you not telling us about humanity?" Sarah stopped walking and studied the Althari diplomat carefully. "What do you mean?" "Your ships, your tactics, your people's reaction to the hegemony threat. You speak of warfare as if it were natural to you. Most species fight for territory, resources, or survival. But humans seem to fight for something else entirely." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft but filled with old pain. 300 years ago, humanity nearly destroyed itself in a war that lasted 50 years. When it ended, barely 1 billion of us were left alive on a poisoned world. We swore that we would never again allow tyranny to flourish unopposed, whether it came from our own species or from others. "The war mentioned in your historical records," Liren said with sudden understanding. "The last war," Sarah corrected. "We call it that because we decided it would be the last time human beings killed each other over politics or resources. Since then, we have fought only to protect the innocent or to stop those who would harm them. And the hegemony qualifies?" Sarah's expression hardened. "The hegemony enslaves entire populations. They destroy worlds that resist them. They represent everything we swore to stand against. They have made themselves our enemy through their actions, not ours." Liren felt a chill run through her fur. "How many humans are there, Captain? Your true population, not the number you gave the Council." 8 billion, Sarah said, "spread across 47 star systems with more colonies being established every year. And how many of them are soldiers?" Sarah's smile was grim. "Ambassador, every human is a soldier when the pack is threatened. We learned that lesson during the last war. The hegemony thinks they are fighting a colonial defense force. They have no idea what they have awakened. Across the galaxy, that awakening was already beginning. On worlds that the Federation had thought were peaceful human colonies, military installations that had been hidden for centuries came online. Ships that had been disguised as cargo haulers and mining vessels revealed weapon systems that rivaled anything in known space. The human population centers themselves transformed. Civilians who had seemed like ordinary farmers, merchants, and scientists began displaying military training that suggested every human settlement was actually a fortress waiting to be activated. On Mars, the great shipyards that had been building exploration vessels began producing warships at a rate that defied belief. On Earth, research facilities that had been studying peaceful applications of advanced physics suddenly began developing weapons that would have terrified the ancient gods of war. But the most significant change was in the humans themselves. The pleasant diplomatic people who had made first contact with the Federation vanished, replaced by something far more dangerous. They became focused, unified, and utterly determined to destroy the hegemony no matter what the cost. Admiral Zektar learned about this transformation when he received intelligence reports from the front lines of the expanding conflict. Hegemony forces that had been sent to pacify human colonies were instead being systematically destroyed by enemies that seemed to appear out of nowhere. "Explain this to me," he demanded of Intelligence Director Cross as they studied battle recordings in his private office. How are humans destroying our forces faster than we can replace them? They appear to have been preparing for this conflict for some time, Cross replied. Every human colony we have attacked has been defended by forces far exceeding our intelligence estimates. More importantly, they seem to be coordinating their efforts across vast distances. Coordination how? Unknown. Our communication specialists believe they are using some form of quantum entanglement network that allows instantaneous communication between human forces anywhere in the galaxy. Zektar studied the tactical displays with growing concern. The humans were not just fighting defensively anymore. They had begun launching coordinated attacks against hegemony positions throughout their territory. Worse, they were winning. What about their technology? Are they more advanced than we thought? Not necessarily. Most of their equipment is still based on principles we consider primitive, but they are using it in ways we never anticipated. For example, they have learned to turn our own quantum shields against us by manipulating the resonance frequencies. How is that possible? We believe they are conducting real-time analysis of our defensive systems during combat and developing countermeasures on the spot. Their learning curve is unprecedented. Zektar felt something he had not experienced in decades: fear. The humans were not just another primitive species to be conquered. They were something far more dangerous, a military force that adapted and improved with every battle. What are our total losses so far? He asked. 47 ships destroyed, 38 severely damaged. 16 military installations destroyed or abandoned. Estimated 70,000 casualties. And human losses? Cross hesitated. Intelligence suggests approximately 12 ships destroyed and perhaps 30,000 casualties. But Admiral, there is something else. What? The humans appear to be getting stronger. Their newer ships are incorporating captured hegemony technology, but modified in ways that make them more effective than our original designs. They are learning from every engagement and becoming more dangerous. Zektar stood and walked to the viewport of his flagship. Outside, he could see the lights of the hegemony fleet, hundreds of ships that represented the most powerful military force in known space. A month ago, he had been confident that nothing could stand against them. Now he was beginning to understand that the humans were not like other species. They did not fight for conquest or glory. They fought for survival, and they had become very, very good at it. Contact Fleet Command, he said finally. Request immediate reinforcement of all border sectors, and begin preparation for planetary bombardment operations. Sir, if we cannot defeat the humans in conventional battle, we will force them to surrender by threatening their civilian populations. No species can continue fighting when their homeworlds are at risk. Cross looked uncomfortable. Admiral, intelligence suggests that threatening human civilians may not produce the desired result. Why not? Because according to our analysis, human civilians are also combatants. Their entire population appears to be militarized to some degree. Threatening them may simply provide the humans with more soldiers, not fewer. Zektar closed his eyes. He had spent his entire career conquering species that fought according to predictable patterns. They defended their military assets, protected their governments, and surrendered when resistance became hopeless. The humans seemed to operate by completely different rules. They protected everyone equally, had no central authority that could surrender, and appeared to consider resistance never truly hopeless. For the first time in his career, Admiral Zektar wondered if the hegemony had chosen an enemy they could not defeat. Far away on Earth, in a secure command bunker beneath the ruins of what had once been Geneva, Fleet Admiral Rebecca Hassan studied the same battle reports that were troubling Admiral Zektar, but her conclusions were very different. How are our production numbers? She asked her staff. Exceeding projections. The civilian population has enthusiastically supported conversion to wartime production. We should have 300 new ships operational within 6 months. And recruitment? We have more volunteers than we can process. Every human colony has requested permission to contribute forces to the war effort. Hassan nodded with satisfaction. The hegemony had made the mistake that humanity's enemies always made. They had assumed that humans would fight like any other species, with limited goals, conventional tactics, and a willingness to negotiate when things became difficult. They were about to learn that when humanity went to war, they went to war completely. Every human, from Earth to the most distant colony, was now part of the war effort. Every resource, every factory, every scientific mind was focused on a single goal: the complete destruction of the hegemony's ability to threaten innocent life. The hegemony thought they were fighting a war of conquest against a primitive species. They were actually fighting a war of extermination against the most dangerous predators the galaxy had ever produced, and they were losing. The final battle for the soul of the galaxy began not with the clash of